In the early hours of April the 26th, 1986, a quiet night in northern Ukraine was split by a powerful explosion that lit the sky like a second sunrise. In Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a routine test turned into a chain reaction of disaster the world had never seen. The reactor core was exposed within seconds. Radioactive graphite burned with a vivid blue light. Invisible particles, powerful enough to destroy the human body, were released into the air and spread across continents. But the real horror wasn't the explosion. It was the silence that followed. Confusion, denial, and the terrifying realization that the situation was already spiraling out of control. Firefighters rushed to the scene unprotected. Workers collapsed within minutes from radiation poisoning. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, did everything in its power to conceal the scale of the catastrophe. What transpired inside that reactor, and the desperate missions that followed, would become one of the darkest pages in human history. Thanks to the efforts of the firefighters, all fires resulting from the accident were brought under control in about 6 hours. However, the situation remained serious, because the real problem was not the fire. Days after the explosion, even when entering the month of May, Reactor 4's core continued to melt. The molten radioactive metal was turning into lava and was slowly burning the floor. Soviet officials had aimed to stop the nuclear leak as a priority, so much so that they initially wanted to cover the nuclear leak from above with intervention. However, they had completely overlooked one thing: there was a considerably large pool of water beneath the melting reactor. This was a mixture of the plant's cooling water and the water the firefighters used to extinguish the fires. Also, there was a thick concrete slab separating the pool and the reactor. However, as the core continued to melt, the concrete was burning, and the molten radioactive metal was seen advancing towards the water. Should the lava come into contact with this water, it would trigger a mega steam explosion and cause the destruction of the entire plant, including the other 3 reactors. This scenario was a catastrophe of catastrophe. The meltdown was advancing toward the water pool, which would trigger a 5,000 kiloton explosion, 140 times the power of the Nagasaki bomb. The catastrophe meant the destruction of Ukraine and the end of life for hundreds of years. The only answer was to drain the pool. But the valves were completely submerged in highly radioactive water. The crisis team clearly warned, this suicide mission meant risking acute radiation syndrome for the volunteers. 3 men, Alexey Ananenko, Valeri Bespalov, and Boris Baranov, volunteered to find the valves, drain the water, and save an entire continent. They stepped in at the exact moment when humanity needed them most. A large part of the risk in the operation to be performed came from the radioactive water. Ananenko, Bespalov, and Baranov would face a radioactive dose of more than 5,000 roentgens per hour, which could bronze the skin in a few seconds. In short, these 3 volunteers had to cope with a radioactive pressure that could cost them their lives. The 3 heroes entered the basement through a corridor filled with countless pipes and valves, wearing protective diving suits. In near total darkness, submerged up to their knees in radioactive water. The air was overwhelming with the metallic sharpness of the radiation and the infernal heat nearby. They had 2 dosimeter devices, one at chest level, the other attached to a leg to measure the value inside the water. Halfway through, Baranov nervously monitored the results on the measuring device. Submerged up to their knees, they continued searching, accompanied by the metallic smell caused by the high radiation of the contaminated water. From time to time, they advanced over the pipes to minimize their contact with the water. With every step, the pressure mounted. The dosimeter on Baranov's leg was ticking rapidly, a deafening drumbeat of danger in the pitch black. They knew every minute spent here multiplied their fatal dose. Their lights barely cut through the oppressive darkness and steam.
Which way do we go?
The heat from the melting core was radiating through the concrete floor. The metallic smell of ionization was so thick it felt like they were breathing metal dust. They had to rely solely on their memory of the plant's labyrinthine pipe system. They searched desperately, their feet scraping along the submerged, unseen floor. Time became a tangible, deadly enemy. Every misplaced step, every false turn was a countdown to acute radiation sickness. Ananenko, remembering the layout from his years on the night shift, finally spotted the critical pipes ahead, a beacon in the watery maze. Finally, when they reached the valves, they would open them without much difficulty, drain the water, and return outside to the applause of their colleagues. They had achieved a task deemed impossible, much faster than estimated, by remaining in the radioactive water whose risk could not be measured. The story circulated that the trio died immediately after the mission. But this was a myth. Contrary to the rumors, all three men survived the fatal dose. They faced the impossible and lived. Valeri Bespalov and Alexey Ananenko are still alive today. They are a quiet reminder of the true heroes who saved a continent. They faced the radioactive hell beneath Chernobyl, saving millions of lives, and perhaps, an entire continent.